to rebuild our military, to respect our veterans, and to keep our country safe. And it is time to stop playing politics with our national security and those who provide it. For these reasons, Mr. President, I object.
Heard.
Yeah, Mr. President, I think I'm going to go. No, it's going to be me. Sorry.
Senator from Illinois does have the floor.
Thank you. All I can do, Mr. President, is to implore my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to reassert their independence, actually put principle before party, and support this resolution, which simply recognizes a basic reality. Trump's denigration of military service is even more disgraceful today than it was 5 years ago, as he is now at least supposed to be our troops commander-in-chief. You know, former Chief of Staff of the Army, General Weyand, once wrote that the American Army really is the people's army. When the Army is committed, the American people are committed. The Army is not so much an arm of the executive branch as it is an arm of the American people. He may have been talking about the Army, but the sentiment holds true for every military branch, every one of which belongs to the American people. It is made up of their sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, all of whom have dedicated their lives to serving the nation they love on behalf of the people they love. When Donald Trump mocks our troops, he's mocking every American in every part of this country. When he derides wounded warriors, he's just providing further proof that to him, the word sacrifice is so foreign, it might as well be in another language. When he makes fun of those who've fallen in battle, he reveals not only his ignorance of national security, but his own personal cowardice and insecurities as well. To him, service will never mean anything to him. So Trump may not want to see me here today. He may not like to see visible proof of my war wounds, but he will keep seeing me here because it is my duty to honor the heroes who saved me by using my second chance, using every extra minute, every extra moment that I have to look out for our troops and veterans from here in the Capitol. I will take advantage of every extra breath I get to breathe because unlike Donald Trump, our men and women in uniform know what courage, sacrifice, and service
the American people from foreign threats. President Trump and I have and always will honor the service and sacrifice of our brave men and women in uniform. As if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of my resolution at the desk. I further ask that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
I object.
The objection is heard.
I cannot support the incomplete Senate Republican resolution for a simple reason. We are not honoring the service and sacrifice of members of the United States Armed Forces, veterans, and Gold Star families in the Republican resolution. We cannot do that if we stay silent and meek when confronted when President Trump's disgraced president. But the Senate can make a clear statement that our chamber rejects such disgraceful sentiments. Republicans' refusal to criticize President Trump speaks volumes when you remember the outrage over Donald Trump's disrespect of our military is not a new concern. It actually originates with Republican senators who were among the very first public officials to speak out against his denigration of military service and prisoners of war. The senior senator from Florida, I remind you, also spared no outrage when, in responding to candidate Trump's claim that Senator McCain was not a war hero, stated, and I quote, "It is not just absurd, it is offensive, it's ridiculous, and I do think it's a disqualifier as commander-in-chief." The Republican resolution is incomplete if it does not condemn this president's comments denigrating our troops. And that is why I am disappointed Republicans won't join me in passing my resolution that recognizes the sad truth. Donald Trump never changed, and his denigration of military service and sacrifice is as disqualifying today as it was years ago. I see my senior senator from Illinois.
Democratic whip.
Mr. President, let me say at the outset how proud I am to serve with my colleague, Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. Her sacrifice for America is nothing short of amazing. Her life story, her commitment to the men and women in uniform that she served with, to the veterans and others, is now well established not just in my state but across this nation. Only a small minority of Americans have had the privilege and honor of serving in the military. Many, like myself, count themselves as those who respect the military and understand that they deserve that respect for their willingness to volunteer to serve and even to die for this nation. What Senator Duckworth has done with her life is a clear indication of the spirit of the fighting women and men who keep this nation democratic and safe. I'm really disappointed. What a great moment it would have been in the history of the Senate if we had Republican support as well as Democratic support for the Duckworth resolution. I'm sorry the senator from Georgia objected. She took exception to the Atlantic magazine article, the one that said where the president called those who died in war losers and suckers. But even that article has been accepted by Fox News as being a valid comment made by the president and reported. But if we were to take the Atlantic magazine and set it aside, there's ample evidence of this president's attitude toward our military. We all heard Donald Trump say publicly when he was running for president in 2015 about our friend and colleague, the late John McCain. He's not a war hero. I like people who weren't captured. 5 years in a prisoner of war camp in Vietnam, and this president, Donald Trump, dismisses him as no war hero. John McCain suffered for this nation. He deserves the respect of everyone, let alone the president. We also saw Donald Trump publicly attack a Gold Star family in 2016, the parents of the late Humayun Khan, an Army captain killed in Iraq in 2004. We heard President Trump dismiss traumatic brain injury faced by service members and veterans as just headaches. We've seen his silence in the face of reports that Russia offered bounties to kill American service members in Afghanistan. We've witnessed his use of military officials for photo ops or for his own personal security purposes. And recall the scene in A Very Stable Genius by Washington Post reporters Philip Rucker and Carol Leonnig, in which Trump called the service chiefs, quote, a bunch of dopes and babies, and barked, "You're all losers. You don't know how to win anymore." President Trump repeated those claims again at a news conference just this week. These are just a few examples of not fake news, but real news about this president's attitude toward the American fighting men and women. It's no surprise that he would say vile things privately if he would say these things publicly. Instead of respecting our troops, President Trump ridicules them. Instead of bowing his head in humility, he barks insults and obscenities. No president in our history, none that I can even imagine, have been so juvenile, so abusive, and so cynical in speaking of our fallen heroes. And what do we hear from Republican veterans and office holders about these sickening comments? Very little, if anything, in objection. Their silence is deafening. Mr. President, I just want to close by thanking my colleague, Senator Duckworth, for bringing this matter to the floor of the United States Senate. Every member of the Senate, men, women, Democrat, Republican, we all carry the flag, proudly march in parades, and give those inspirational speeches on Memorial Day about the men and women who have served our nation. But where are the voices in the United States Senate today to speak out against the outrages of this president? I yield the floor.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I'm honored to join Senator Duckworth in supporting this proposal, and it gives me great pride to serve in the United States Senate with her. She is the living embodiment of the kind of sacrifice that our president does not understand. There are two things here, though, that are very wrong. One is a president who thinks that the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who have laid down their lives for this country are suckers and losers, and that it's okay to say that about them. It is beyond disrespectful, it is beneath contempt, and it is totally in character for this man. Those soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines can't answer. They can't speak for themselves any longer. So when something like that is said, it is very important that in the highest offices of the country, people stand up and push back. In graves in France and Belgium and Manila and around the world lie the mortal remains of men, boys, women who gave their lives and who cannot speak for themselves. And it is heartbreaking for me to see that we cannot come together and agree on this in this body. I can promise you that if President Obama or President Clinton had said anything like this, the other side of this chamber would be in pandemonium. It would be a scene of hysteria. Senators would be lining up through the doors to come and condemn this foul and hateful speech. We'd be hearing a lot about the last measure of devotion. And instead, we are seeing the last measure of devolution of a great party into what now resembles as much of anything a cult. I'll be interested to see what my colleagues have in mind as they go through next year's Veterans Day and Memorial Day, having been unable to say one word against this calumny of our troops today. It is, frankly, heartbreaking. I traveled a lot with John McCain, and one of our trips took us through the Philippines, and I got up very early in the morning to go and have basically a dawn visit to the American Cemetery in Manila. And the particular reason I went there is to see a name on the wall of the memorial, George Bruin Whitehouse. George was 21 when he was killed. He was flying fighter planes as a Navy pilot off the aircraft carrier called the USS Kampeni. His body was never recovered. His plane was shot down and crashed into the wilderness, and that was the end of it. But his name is still there, carved high up in the marble as a last memorial of his sacrifice. A president who doesn't get that is a disgrace. I yield the floor. Oh, and particularly I yield the floor to a colleague who is an American combat veteran from the Vietnam War, to which my father dedicated 5 years of his life. So it is a remarkable honor for me to be able to speak in between Senator Duckworth and Senator Carper, and I am very cognizant of that honor. I yield.
And it is an honor to follow my friend Sheldon. And you could only turn out well, my friend, with the kind of bloodlines that you have. Mr. President, I rise today really for one reason. I rise today to make crystal clear that we are profoundly grateful to every American who has answered our nation's call to serve in uniform, to risk their lives, and in too many instances to lay down their lives so that we might remain a free people. We are profoundly grateful to their families who have sacrificed so much while their loved ones were away, fighting to protect the rest of us and making this a better and more just world. And we're especially indebted to those families whose loved ones left for war and never came home. It is a sacrifice that many Americans can barely imagine, but one that has been all too real for millions of families since the founding of our nation. Mr. President, one of those families was my mother's family. I never got to meet my mom's younger brother. His name was Bob Kid Patton. My mom was a Patton. And Bobby, as he was known, was the youngest of 5 children, born near coal mining town Beckley, West Virginia, to my grandparents, Ray and Effie Mae Patton, a Gold Star mother. Bobby was killed in action on October 26, 1944, during a kamikaze attack in the Western Pacific on his aircraft carrier, the USS Sewanee. Among the bodies of the ship's crew who were never recovered was that of our Uncle Bob. On the day of that attack, he was, get this, 19 years, 6 months, 23 days old. My grandparents were never able to see their son again or say goodbye. My sister and I, along with our cousins, would never meet him. Neither Bob Patton nor his Sewanee shipmates, who also perished that day, were suckers or losers, as President Trump has characterized others who answered our nation's call to uniform. They were and remain heroes. I was fortunate enough to make it home after serving 3 tours in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, but 58,000 of my brothers and sisters never did. Their names are inscribed in a black granite wall not far from here so that Americans will remember their sacrifice. And let me add, those 58,000 Americans were not suckers or losers either. As President Trump has described John McCain, they were patriots. Unlike Donald Trump, they answered the call of duty. My squadron and I were deployed to Southeast Asia as part of the 7th Fleet for several of the years that John McCain was held as a prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton, along with hundreds of other POWs. His plane had been shot down in 1967 over Hanoi. Both his arms and one of his legs were broken during the ensuing crash, and he was taken a prisoner of war. For 5.5 years, John McCain was held captive, beaten, tortured. And despite this, he refused the early release that was offered to him by his captors. Far from being the loser that President Trump refers to him, John McCain was the embodiment of courage, and my colleagues know it. He proved it again and again and again, in uniform and right here in this chamber, standing right over there. Mr. President, a number of us in this body have been blessed to serve alongside other true patriots, both during our time in Congress and in uniform. The late Dan Inouye lost an arm and he earned the Medal of Honor while serving in the legendary 442nd, the most decorated Army unit of World War II. They were all Japanese Americans. They were despised by many Americans. They were heroes too. And then there's former Senator Bob Dole, another highly decorated World War II hero who nearly paralyzed, lost the use of one arm after being hit by enemy fire while helping to save the life of a fellow soldier. And then there's, of course, our amazing friend, our amazing colleague, Tammy Duckworth. God loves her. Tammy, thank you for bringing us to the floor today. But for any American to disparage heroes like them who gave their life and limb of our country would be despicable. But to hear that contempt from a man, now our commander-in-chief, who chose not to serve in the Vietnam War, allegedly because of bone spurs in his foot, is worse than despicable. It is abhorrent. What is most surprising and really disappointing to me, though, is not that Donald Trump would use words like loser and sucker to describe heroes like John McCain and others. What is most surprising and disappointing is that there are only Democrats on this floor today condemning the utter contempt that Donald Trump has shown for our service members over too many years. There should be 100 senators on this floor today, 100, saying in no uncertain terms that we have nothing but respect and admiration for those who have served, and we will not allow them to be mocked or ridiculed by anyone, including the President of the United States. Honoring those who have served this country and risked their lives for this country is among the most sacred obligations any of us have. If we can't stand up and defend those men and women, then we have no business being here. Let me close with this. to the millions of soldiers, sailors, airmen and women, Marines and Coast Guard members who are risking their lives right now around the world and who have done so for generations. Listen to this. We salute you. We thank you. We thank your families from the bottom of our hearts. God bless you. Stay home. Stay safe. Come home. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nevada.
Mr. President, listening to my colleagues, I'm honored every day to be able to serve with them in the United States Senate. In 2018, in Minden, Nevada, I had the honor of commemorating the opening of the Moving Wall. This is a replica of the Vietnam War Memorial that travels the country so the public can pay their respects to Vietnam veterans. I will tell you, I will always remember the stories that veterans and their families shared with me that day. Stories of coming home from a divisive war to an equally divided public. The pain of that reception was still fresh for many of them decades later. America's service members make an implicit pact with our country. They agree to put their lives on the line, and in exchange, they deserve our support, our care for them and their families, and our respect. Last week, The Atlantic magazine published a story in which anonymous sources claim that Donald Trump doesn't demonstrate that respect. The article described a commander-in-chief who calls his own country's fallen soldiers losers and suckers. The story fits a pattern from other anonymous sources over the years, some of whom describe the president lashing out at generals and calling them dopes and babies. Now, granted, these are from anonymous sources, so let's set them aside for just a moment. As the saying goes, journalism is the rough draft of history, and sometimes that rough draft gets things wrong. But what do we know? What we do know from the president's public statements is that Donald Trump does not understand the sacrifice and heroism that Americans' armed forces demonstrate on a daily basis, and that makes him unfit to lead them. How can a commander-in-chief make life and death decisions for our troops when he doesn't understand the very nature of the sacrifice he is asking? I'm not making up Donald Trump's refusal to understand military sacrifice. You just have to look at the record, and you've heard some of it today. But that record is part of a public record that in 1968 showed Donald Trump avoided military service through a medical deferment. Yet although Donald Trump did not serve in the military, he's felt free to criticize others who have and their families. In 2015, we heard then-candidate Donald Trump said that John McCain, and I quote, was not a war hero. I like people who weren't captured, he said. He's talking about a man who endured torture during the 5 years he spent as a prisoner, a man who upheld the highest standards of our military by turning down the release that his captors offered him in order to stay with his fellow POWs. A man who refused to denounce his country even when his captors informed him it could earn him his freedom. This president clearly has no conception of that integrity and that sacrifice. A president who refuses to honor men and women who were captured doesn't understand what heroism is. And in 2016, as the Republican nominee for president, Donald Trump attacked the family of Captain Humayun Khan, who was killed in Iraq trying to stop a suicide bomber. For his brave and self-sacrificing actions that day, Captain Khan received a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. Now, accompanied by his wife, Mr. Khan spoke about his son's sacrifice at the Democratic National Convention, and in response, after seeing Mr. Khan and his wife, Donald Trump said, well, look, if you look at his wife, she was standing there. She had nothing to say. She probably maybe she wasn't allowed to have anything to say at all. Can you imagine criticizing a mother for not being able to articulate the pain of losing her son? A president who mocks a military family's pain doesn't understand what selflessness is. And just this Monday, as we've heard, Donald Trump said, and again, I quote, that the top people in the Pentagon want to do nothing but fight wars so that all of those wonderful companies that make the bombs stay happy. Well, a president who attacks America's generals as valuing profits over the men and women they command don't understand and doesn't understand what leadership is. And because even after 3 years as Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump can't understand or appreciate the commitment and sacrifice of America's service members, he cannot effectively lead them. At the end of the day, Donald Trump does not understand the very purpose of our military. He seems to believe that the military is his personal police force. He doesn't get that the allegiance our armed forces swear is to the American nation, its people, and its Constitution. We saw this when in June, President Trump threatened to use the Insurrection Act to send active duty troops to police the streets of this country. And I was in Washington the day that this administration ordered police on horseback, armed with tear gas and concussion grenades, to disperse protesters who were peacefully demonstrating against police violence. And also that Donald Trump could stage a photo opportunity in front of a church holding a Bible. And that same night, I could hear the noise overhead from the National Guard Black Hawk helicopters that engaged in a show of force display on the streets of Washington. Now, Mr. President, I come from a family of service members. My father was stationed in Korea after the war. My grandfathers both served in the U.S. Army. And I had a great uncle who was on the beach at Normandy. My father-in-law piloted LCM-3s in Korea for the Army. And I keep on the shelf in my Senate office a photo that he took of the Korean War Memorial here in Washington in winter. That stark image of troops in the snow moving cautiously through danger is a reminder to me of the humanity and sacrifice of our service members, including my father and father-in-law. And each year, when I celebrate the induction of new Nevadans to the service academies, I see the next generation devoting their idealism and their courage to our country. And I consider the weighty sacrifice by people who are so very young. You know, after reading the stories in the news and reflecting on the history of comments from our current Commander-in-Chief, I just want to say one simple thing to veterans, service members, and their families in Nevada and throughout this country. Thank you. I will always stand with American troops who put their lives and bodies on the line to protect our country. And the American people, well, they deserve a Commander-in-Chief who will do the same. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm proud to follow my colleagues who have spoken so eloquently, particularly Senators Carper and Duckworth, and to join them today because they are in the great tradition of this body. Bob Dole, Daniel Inouye, Tammy Duckworth, Tom Carper, John McCain. We've known our share of heroes. And I'm here to say thank you to them and to the others among us who have served. I'm proud to be here as a dad of two veterans, one a combat infantry officer in the Marine Corps, another a special operator in the Navy, both deployed, and to have served myself in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. And I'm here to say to the other moms and dads and loved ones, Donald Trump does not speak for me. Donald Trump does not speak for us. Donald Trump